My father, mother, and I are the only members of my family. As an only child, I have had a relatively easy life up until now. When I was 20, I was a university student and had an encounter with a girl who changed my life values. That girl was my younger sister. I left my parents' house and started living alone, and my mother decided to adopt a child with no relatives after consulting with a friend. At first, I was surprised at my mother's proposal. My father and I, on the other hand, gladly accepted the proposal, hoping that at least a few unfortunate children would be spared. When I first went with my mother to pick up the child, I was surprised to see her. The girl was 10 years old, but she was nothing like the other 10-year-olds in the neighborhood. She lacked the energy of a child, was small and skinny, and her hair was a shambles. She gave me the look of someone who had given up on everything. At first glance, I could tell what had happened to her. I inquired about the child with my mother's acquaintance, who had introduced us. Since birth, the child had been physically abused and neglected, and her parents had vanished one night. Her homeroom teacher became concerned when she stopped coming to school and called the police, and the child was eventually taken into custody. Her parents had disappeared, and she had no relatives. My mother and I cried when we heard the story. When I heard the story, I thought to myself, how wonderful my life was. This happiness should not be taken for granted. From now on, I want to make her happy. With this thought in mind, I resolved to devote my life to making my new sister happy. But even though I thought so, I didn't know where to begin. So I first asked her what she liked. "What do you like? Is there anything you want?" I asked my sister. "Nothing at all," she replied quietly. I repeatedly told her, "Now that we are family, you don't have to treat me like a stranger." But she continued to treat me like a stranger. I invited my sister to a shopping mall on a day when I had a day off from college and my part-time job. We borrowed my father's car and drove together to a newly opened shopping mall. I was excited because I had never been there before and was curious about it. I was hoping that by going to a newly opened stores, my sister would find something she would like as well. I knew that if she looked through all of the beautiful stores, she'd find something she'd like. But she just kept walking forward. So I went into a clothing store that piqued my interest. After all, she is a girl, so I expected her to be pleased to see some cute clothes. I chose and coordinated a few outfits for her and let her try them on. I complimented her after she finished trying on the clothes. "How cute! They look great on you!" She was silent and expressionless, but she appeared to be smiling slightly. I could tell my sister was happy because she was in a better mood than usual. So I bought them for her as a gift. We began hanging out together every time I had a day off after that. We visited parks, zoos, and aquariums that my sister had never visited before. We'd go to the mall occasionally, and I picked out clothes for her. As I spent more time with my sister in this manner, her expression softened. She started calling me sis. To be honest, juggling college and a part-time job had been difficult for me. But for some reason, working part-time was not difficult for me because I wanted to help my younger sister. I felt content to make my sister happy, even if it wasn't only a little. 5 years later, at the age of 25, I started working full-time. My younger sister was 15 years old and a senior in high school. She also started working part-time, so we've spent less time together than before. We did, however, go out on occasion when we had days off together. One day, my sister asked me out for the first time. I was so excited that I canceled my date with my boyfriend and went to see her. We hadn't been to the shopping mall where we used to go in a long time. Since I hadn't been there in a while, there were new stores and many other changes. I was looking around at the new surroundings when I heard an unexpected word from my sister. "Could I pick out some outfits for you today?" My eyes welled up with tears and I was moved by her words, but I tried to hide them with a smile. "Oh, really? I'm so happy. I'll leave it to you then," I replied. My sister was as calm as usual, and despite the fact that her expression didn't change much, she did appear to be excited. She led me into a clothing store. It was a new store that I had never heard of. Then my sister said, "Please wait a moment." So I was looking around at the clothes in that store when my sister returned a few minutes later with the clothes. That was quick, I thought. But without saying anything, I took my sister's clothes and went to the fitting room to change. My eyes welled up again as I changed, because I was so happy to be wearing the clothes my sister had chosen for me. After I finished changing, I opened the fitting room curtains and showed myself to my sister. Then I heard unexpected words from her that she had never said since we met. "How pretty!" My sister smiled as she said that. Hearing those words, I froze for about 5 seconds. From the bottom of my heart, I was overjoyed to hear those words from her. But when I suddenly came back to myself, I felt somewhat embarrassed. "Oh, thanks!" I tried to hide my tears and embarrassment as I responded. Then my sister looked worried and asked me, "What do you say? Do you like them?" I smiled and said, "Of course I do. I'm so happy. I'll take these. Thank you." I then took the clothes and proceeded to the checkout. Then, "Wait a minute, please. Please allow me to pay for them today." That's what she said. For a brief moment, I had no idea what those unexpected words meant. But after further consideration, I realized that many things made sense. My sister had recently started working part-time, and while I was usually the one who chose the store, she chose this one today. And my sister was quick to pick outfits. I realized my sister had planned ahead of time to buy clothes for me. I was already so happy that I resisted the urge to cry. I pretended to be fine and spoke in a normal tone. "In that case, I'll let you pay for them today." I handed my clothes to my sister. Then my quiet sister smiled slightly and happily and went to the checkout. Seeing her back, tears welled up in my eyes. 3 years passed in the blink of an eye, and I was 28 years old. My younger sister turned 18 and was graduating from high school. I asked her what she was going to do, and she told me she was going to get a job. I advised her to attend college because she was intelligent, had good grades, but she refused. "You all took excellent care of me, so if I want to go to college, I want to pay for it myself. Besides, I don't think I want to go to college at the moment." That was her opinion. I thought she was wasting her talent, but I decided to honor my sister's wishes and look after her. And to my surprise, she got a job at a well-known company in town. The whole family was overjoyed to hear that. A few months later, my sister left my parents' house. I was almost in tears on the day of her departure, but that didn't mean I wouldn't see her again. I sent her off with a smile and a promise to contact her on occasion. 7 years later, I turned 35. My sister was 25. We kept in touch every week, but she only came home once a year. My sister's only contact with me every week was always about how much fun she was having. It was a little disappointing that she only came back once a year. But I really wanted her to have a good life, so that's what kept me going every day. Then one day, I received a surprise report from my sister that she was getting married. I was surprised because she had never mentioned her boyfriend to me, but I was overjoyed. Actually, she had made the decision to marry quite some time before and had informed our parents of it. But she had told them she wanted to tell me personally, so they had remained silent. But she was too shy and nervous to tell me. It was very typical of her, and I thought it was very cute. The wedding date had already been set, and it was a month away. I thought it was too soon, but I was too happy to care. 1 month later, the wedding day arrived. During this month, I met her husband, prepared her dress, and was very busy. I was overjoyed that they were able to hold their wedding without incident. My sister looked really beautiful in her pure white dress. The wedding went smoothly, and the speeches of the bride and groom began. The groom's speech was surprisingly brief, but the content was so moving that some people were moved to tears. Then it was my sister's turn. I was anticipating what she would say. Was she going to talk about her husband's episode or our parents? After greeting and thanking both parents, my bride, my sister, opened her mouth. My sister is... She began to talk about the first time we met. At first, all she felt was fear. Fear that she will be bullied or beaten up again because she is an orphan. She said I didn't do anything but treat her nicely, but she couldn't open her heart to me. She didn't know what to do the first time we went to a shopping mall because it was so bright and shiny, so she just walked straight ahead. She also mentioned how happy she was when I dressed her in cute clothes for the first time. That I took her to a variety of places, and she gradually grew to enjoy them. As she was talking about these things, tears were streaming down her eyes. I had never seen my sister cry before, and I was so moved that I couldn't stop the tears from falling from my own eyes. And my sister said to me, "You are truly irreplaceable in my life. I owe you a great deal. So I want you to be happy as well. I appreciate everything you've done for me." She gave me a big smile, which she had never given me before. I was overjoyed to see her smile, and it gave me complete peace of mind. What I have done was not in vain. Despite the fact that my sister had endured a difficult life for a long time, her smile convinced me that she would be happy from now on because she had met her husband. I will never forget her smile on this day. I'll try to be happy so that I can keep protecting my sister's smile and fulfilling her wishes.
That day, I was feeling more down than usual from the morning. It was because I had to meet with Sebastian, my client's manager and my least favorite guy in the company. Simply put, Sebastian was a capable man at work. He was a graduate of a highly regarded university, thus he was quite efficient. During business meetings, he consistently delivered the correct orders and asked the appropriate questions. Furthermore, he knew more about the product than I did, so if I tried to explain something ambiguous to him, his expression became stern. I was typically aware of this, but I had no choice but to continue explaining. Whenever that happened, he'd say,
"Stop it right there."
He'd say it emotionlessly. He seemed to be stockpiling his rage, which worried me instead. I'd wait for him to say something. Then, as is his wont, Sebastian would say,
"You should have gone over the details in advance, so that you could properly convince the other party. Talking about it any longer would be a waste of time for me."
I believe Sebastian and I are around 20 years apart in age, but we are both members of society. I thought it was basic sense to speak properly to one another. However, Sebastian did not seem to have the slightest intention of doing so. Even with his attitude at first, I didn't think he was looking down on me. But, as is customary, Sebastian abruptly ended the business conversation. And there was an incident that made me aware of Sebastian's intention. He said to me, as if he wanted me to hear,
"No wonder you are a high school graduate."
He said that. When he said that for the first time, I thought I had misheard him. There's no way he said that. That's what I honestly wanted to think at that time. In my brain, I tried to come up with numerous interpretations of what he had said. However, it was impossible. I couldn't possibly ask him what he said to me. I went back to my office that day in agony. On that particular day, I was feeling more depressed than normal. The reason for this was that Sebastian had assigned me homework. The homework was to convince Sebastian of the benefits of doing business with our company. I took the homework as an ultimatum from Sebastian. This would determine whether or not he would continue to do business with us. The end of our relationship would mean the end of business with our company. Sebastian's company was a very large client for our company. If I were to lose a contract with such a large corporation, our company would suffer greatly as a result of my actions. Having stated that, all I had to do was provide an explanation that would satisfy Sebastian. However, it was not that simple. I worked as a sales representative for a clothing manufacturer. Some apparel manufacturers were shifting away from store-based sales as mail order and online sales increased. Still, physical storefronts remained an important sales channel that couldn't be completely abolished. On the other hand, cost control was a major issue. The stores and products are normally owned by the manufacturers. However, this is where sales agents come in, since they hire, train, and perform sales operations. Customers, on the other hand, don't care where the staff they interact with is assigned. If the personnel has a negative attitude, the store will have a bad reputation. This will further damage the reputation of the brand. As a result, garment manufacturers have strict standards for appointing sales agents. Sebastian was in charge of that. On that day, I thought I had completed the homework given to me by Sebastian in my own way. I spent more time than usual crafting an understandable presentation. I was prepared to answer any question Sebastian would throw at me. And yet, Sebastian's face became sterner as he listened to my explanation.
"Stop it there."
I had the impression that I could have heard him say it at any time. But at that time, it was different, but not in a good way. I was treated worse than usual. Sebastian picked up the ink bottle on his desk, and he splattered ink on the presentation materials I had prepared. I was indeed curious why there was an ink container on the desk as soon as we sat face to face. Sebastian might have intended to spray it on the document I had prepared. So maybe that's why he had it on his desk from the beginning. "What are you doing?" I said to Sebastian as if I was yelling at him. However, Sebastian, without showing any sign of offense at all, said,
"How dare you speak to me like that? You have been presenting me with the same boring documents as usual. After all, I guess this is the limit of a high school graduate."
With that, he looked at my face. Normally, I would look away from his sharp eyes, but on that day, I glared at him. I could not tolerate his attitude. I looked at the ink-splattered documents and remembered the people who had assisted me in preparing them. I recall returning to the office, stressed up about how to cope with Sebastian's homework. I reported the whole situation to my boss, Chief Daniel. Then,
"That's a big deal. The fate of the company depends on it."
Daniel said so. But in contrast to the gravity of his words, Daniel's expression was cheerful. That was very typical of him. Perhaps he was thinking, progress comes after overcoming adversity.
Only by overcoming adversity do people grow. You must be able to be happy in the face of adversity.
Daniel was the type of person who would say a cheesy line without thinking twice. Those words came to me, as I recall, shortly after I was put in charge of Sebastian. But the difficulties I'm facing are too formidable. When I said that to Daniel after meeting with Sebastian several times, he said,
"I'm looking forward to seeing what happens after you get over this."
At that moment, I thought to myself, I realized that no matter what I said, Daniel won't change me as the person in charge. Having said that, Daniel was not the type of person who would abandon his employees. He was constantly available for advice and collaborated with me to come up with problem-solving suggestions. When work needs to be done, he often lent a hand.
"If we can come up with a good basis of a strategy, we can use it to explain to other companies. What do you say? We all think about it together."
When I told Daniel about Sebastian's assignment, he asked his colleagues in the department.
"I'm in."
The first person to say so was Jack. Jack was one of my seniors whom I admired for his kind demeanor and capacity to care for others in any way. Sebastian wasn't the only one who had teased me about my academic credentials. Because I had just graduated from high school, I had been treated unfairly on various occasions to varying degrees. But no matter how depressed I was, I had done my best thus far. It was no exaggeration to suggest that the presence of Daniel and Jack had a significant role in my ability to do so. In addition to Jack, many people agreed to help me. We decided to work together as a small group to deal with Sebastian. We even gave it a name. The name of the team was "Let's Surprise the Hell Out of Sebastian." We held many meetings and prepared things from that day till the day of the appointment with Sebastian. We also planned for a question and answer session with Jack playing as Sebastian when the materials were completed. However, the things we had so carefully prepared were suddenly covered with ink right in front of my eyes. Nonetheless, Sebastian said to me as though he didn't mind that I was staring at him,
"Come back here in 30 minutes.
I didn't make the slightest move.
"Are you deaf? I said come back here in 30 minutes.
But I still didn't move. I didn't want to move. Then I noticed that I was acting differently than usual, and Sebastian began to look puzzled. There was an uneasy vibe between the two of us. During that time, I wasn't thinking about what I was going to do next. To be honest, I had no idea what to do. What should I do? When I was at a loss for what to do, then the door to the conference room opened. Sebastian and I both looked toward the door. There stood a woman who looked to be around 60 years old. I don't know whether she was angry or surprised, but she looked somewhat tense.
Ma'am, why are you here?
Sebastian muttered. I did not know who she was, but based on Sebastian's astonished expression, I assumed she wasn't typically around. I wondered if she had run all the way here. The woman grasped her chest with her right hand as though gently catching her air. Then, after taking a slow breath, she said to Sebastian, "Do you have any idea who he is?" Sebastian was stunned. Perhaps he was replaying in his head the meaning of the woman's comments. He wasn't the only one who pondered the true significance of the woman's statements. I was too. When I heard what the woman stated, I had a large question mark in my head. It was because I didn't understand what she meant. The woman slowly walked into the meeting room and approached Sebastian. Then she said, "He is Mr. Bailey's grandson."
Excuse me?
With that, Sebastian froze. Hearing that one word, I understood what the woman was trying to say. My grandpa, or Mr. Bailey, as the lady called him, was the sole designer for the company. To me, he was my grandpa, no different from the rest of my family. But the fact that this company had become a well-known garment manufacturer in the industry over the past few decades was due in large part to my grandpa's influence. I admired him so greatly that after graduating from high school, I apprenticed myself to him. I wanted to learn the business as quickly as possible under my grandpa's guidance. One day, about 3 years after I started working at my grandfather's place, my grandpa called me, and, "You should get out to the world and learn." That's what my grandpa told me. According to him, it is critical to understand who is engaged in the production of a piece of apparel before it reaches the hands of the consumer. That's what he told me. So, I worked for an apparel manufacturer's directly managed store for 2 years. This was my 3rd year working for a sales representative company, which was one of the face-to-face sales approaches. Only the CEO of the company and a few other executives are aware that I am my grandpa's grandchild. I didn't want to work under my grandpa's name, and I didn't want my coworkers to be bothered by it. I still didn't understand why the lady came here in a panic. Then, the woman turned to me and said, "I am very sorry for not realizing Sebastian's rude attitude. I apologize on behalf of our representative." She shook my hand. Sebastian's reference to ma'am was to the CEO's wife. Feeling somewhat uncomfortable, I said to the woman, "It's okay, but how did you know about Sebastian's attitude toward me? And why are you here?" Then the woman explained to me. "Daniel contacted me. He told me that his staff was going to make a great proposal to our company today. However, he also mentioned that a man named Sebastian might sabotage, so Daniel requested my assistance. But I'm sorry for getting here late." She looked sorry. But how did she and Daniel become acquainted? She might have guessed I was thinking that. Actually, Daniel and I went to the same middle school. When we were 30, we reconnected at a middle school reunion. We've been in touch since we discovered we worked in the same industry. That's why she knows his first name too. I understood, but my questions didn't end there. How did she know about my grandpa? And how did you get to know my grandpa? When I asked her, her face brightened slightly. "I used to work for your grandfather once, and I met you when you were little too." I'm back. As I returned to the office, I headed directly to Daniel.
Oh, I see your presentation went well.
With that, Daniel smiled. The presentation was a disaster, but after that, I had a series of happy moments. Sebastian said that he will change his attitude from now on. My response would have made no sense to an outsider, but Daniel seemed to understand everything based on my reaction.
I see you overcame the difficulties. You are looking good,
Daniel told me. It's all thanks to you all. I appreciate it. With that, I shook hands with everyone. When I looked around, I noticed that everyone was smiling at me. Then I realized I'm blessed to have such wonderful people in my life.
When I got home from work, my wife was preparing dinner. I said, "I need to talk to you," to my wife. She sat down without saying a word. She had a straight face, but her eyes were full of pain. Looking at her face, I didn't know where to begin, but I had to say it. "I want a divorce." I said these words calmly. My wife's expression didn't change. She just quietly asked back, "Why?" When I dared not to answer that question, my wife finally became angry. My wife threw her spoon and plate and screamed, "You're not a man!" After that, we finally didn't exchange a word. That night, I could hear my wife sobbing. I know. She wanted to know why we were in this situation, but I could never give her an explanation that would satisfy her. The real reason I wanted a divorce was because I was having an affair. I was in love with another woman, Yuna, and I no longer loved my wife. I just pitied her. I had a deep sense of guilt as I wrote up the divorce papers. In it, I stated that I was transferring the house, the car, and the stock I currently own to my wife. My wife glanced at it, tore it up, and looked at me coldly. My wife, whom I had spent 10 years of my life with, had become a stranger to me. Everything that she had done for me, I felt really bad that it had to end this way because of me. But I couldn't turn away anymore from the feeling that I love Yuna. After tearing up the papers, my wife finally started screaming and crying. This may sound strange, but I was a little relieved to see her cry. The divorce was now final. The word divorce, that had been haunting me like a curse for the past few weeks, had finally become a reality. The next day, I came home late from work. When I returned home, my wife was on the table, concentrating on writing something. Dinner was not yet ready, but I had no appetite, so I just collapsed into bed and fell asleep. I woke up in the middle of the night to find my wife still at the table writing something. I was no longer interested and went back to sleep. In the morning, my wife confronted me with what she said were the terms of our divorce. She said she didn't want the house, the car, the stocks, or anything else. But instead, she wanted a month to prepare. And my wife's condition was that during that 1 month, we would live as much as possible as we had in the past. The reason was clear. Our son has a very important tournament coming up in a month. She didn't want to upset him as much as possible. I immediately agreed with her on that. But she had another condition. The day we were married, when we went out to get our marriage license, I want you to remember how you picked me up and carried me to the front door. And for the next month, just as you did then, every morning when I go to work, I want you to pick me up and carry me to the front door, she said. I thought she had finally gone crazy. But I didn't want to get into any more trouble with my wife, so I silently accepted her conditions. I told Yuna about this. Yuna said, "What is she thinking? She's getting a divorce anyway. She's such an idiot." I laughed so hard. My wife and I hadn't had any physical intimacy at all for years. I hadn't even held her hand for a while, so the first day I picked my wife up and took her to the front door. Both of us felt awkward and strange. but our son was so happy that he clapped his hands and followed behind us. "I guess Daddy's gonna carry Mommy off." As soon as I heard those words, my heart ached. My wife kept her eyes closed softly. "Please don't tell him about the divorce," she whispered in my ear. I nodded silently. But for some reason, I was still very upset inside as I did so. I quietly dropped my wife off at the door, and she walked straight to the bus stop and went to work. I drove my son to school as usual and went to work. On the second morning, I felt a little more comfortable than the first day. My wife was leaning against my chest, and I picked her up. I suddenly noticed a faint scent coming from her blouse and thought, when was the last time I had seen my wife this close? I was astonished to realize that she was no longer the wife of my youth. Her face was covered with fine lines and wrinkles, and also had some streaks of gray hair. Seeing this, I realized how long we had been married. For that brief moment, I asked myself. I wondered what I had done to my wife. On the morning of the fourth day, when I picked up my wife, I suddenly felt that feeling that had once been between us. This was the woman I had cherished, the one who had believed in me, who had given me everything and married me. On the fifth day, the sixth day, the feeling grew stronger. I did not tell Yuna about this. As the days went by, I felt it getting easier and easier each day to pick up my wife. I simply thought that since I was doing this every morning, I might have gained some strength in my arms. One morning, my wife was picking out her clothes for the day. She sat in front of the mirror and tried on many outfits, but still couldn't seem to find one that fit her perfectly. Then she sighed. "All of them have become too big." When I heard those words, I was flabbergasted. My wife had somehow lost weight. It was not because my arm strength had increased that I could pick her up more easily, but because she lost weight. I was astonished. That much? I didn't notice it because she always looked so unconcerned. I wondered if she had kept the bitter and painful feelings over a divorce inside her heart to the extent that she had lost so much weight. I reached out my hand and touched her. Then my son came. "Daddy, take Mommy in your arms. It's time to say goodbye." For my son, to see his father picking up Mom every morning have already become an important part of his daily life. My wife gently called my son to come to her and hugged him tightly with all her might. I looked away. If I didn't, I was afraid I would change my mind at the last minute. I silently took my wife in my arms as usual and carried her to the front door. She just gently put her arms around my neck. I found myself hugging her tightly. Yes, just like the day we got married. As I felt her lightened body in my arms, I felt an inexpressible sadness. And on the last morning, when I picked her up in my arms, I couldn't take one more step. My son had already left for school that day. I took my wife firmly in my arms and said, "I didn't realize until now how much we didn't feel each other's warmth, or how much time we didn't communicate face to face." And I headed off to work as usual. I was afraid that something would rush me, that I would change my decision at the last minute. As if to shake it off, I stopped the car, jumped out without locking the door, and went up to the upper floor where my office was located. I have to get to the office before I change my mind. Quickly, to Yuna in her office. I opened the door and Yuna was there. The moment I saw her, I couldn't help but speak up. "Yuna, I'm sorry. I can't get a divorce." Yuna was taken aback and put her hand on my forehead. "Are you okay? Do you have a fever?" I removed Yuna's hands from my forehead and said again, "Yuna, I'm really sorry. I can't divorce her. The reason my marriage with my wife was so boring wasn't because I didn't love her I just turned my back on her. My wife is the most important thing to me. That's why I can't divorce her. Sorry. Yuna finally seemed to understand what was going on and slapped my cheek as hard as she could, slammed the door shut, and ran out, screaming and crying. On my way home from work, a flower shop caught my eye. I had a bouquet made for my wife and carried the flowers for her. I don't think this will make her forgive me, but I will apologize sincerely, and we will try to start over again. I made up my mind and headed home. I found my wife lying cold on the bed. I knew absolutely nothing about it. I didn't know anything about it. I didn't even know that she had cancer. I was so obsessed with another woman that I did not even realize that my wife had been fighting desperately against the disease for the past few months. She knew that she was going to die soon. The terms of her divorce were not to blame me, but to protect me, my son, and my family. To protect me from being blamed by my beloved son after her death, so that he would not be left alone. Every morning, his father picking up his mother and gently sending her off. To my son who saw me like that every morning, I was not a terrible father who forced his mother to divorce him, but a kind father who loved his mother to the end. My wife was such a lovely woman. I deeply regretted what I did. I only regret that I realized it too late. I wish I could have done more to atone for my sins. I wish I could have hugged her more. Because I couldn't do anything for my wife, I will cherish this family that she protected. I'm sorry. Thank you. I love you.